Hello, everybody. I'm Gadi Levy, Executive Director of the Temple Emanu-El Streicker Cultural Center, and I know that you, thank you, and I know that you, as well as the 3,000 of our friends who are joining us virtually tonight, are excited as I am to welcome two extraordinary women, two feminists, whose unflagging dedication reshaped America. Already active in the movement for women's rights years ago, Letty Pogrebin and Gloria Steinem gathered with other writers, panelists, activists to develop a new way to address the Shanda, the shame of Americans' women inequality. Job discrimination, limitation on the right to get credit card, a huge pay gap, just to name a few. The result, the first American magazine owned, run, and written by women, Ms. Magazine, found a market and influence. By the way, somebody brought the first edition today. I thought it was really cool. Found a market and influence greater than anybody anticipated. Tonight, we welcome them to our stage to discuss standards of a different sort of Shanda, those of Letty's large Jewish immigrant family. Upon the release of her new book, Shanda, which is on sale in the lobby, we are honored that Letty joins us to discuss her family and the many faces of shame. Letty and Gloria do not know this, but to introduce them, please have a big welcome to Letty's twin daughters, Abby and Robin Pogrebin.
Shana Tova. The world knows that Gloria is fierce, formidable, and fabulous, an unflinching revolutionary who changed the world. What fewer know is that she keeps a stash of Milky Way bars in her desk drawer. But Robin and I, at age 7 and 8, had the inside track to that hidden candy when we were growing up around the lively, scrappy Midtown offices of Ms. Magazine, which we remember fondly as a playground of role models, dressed in cool bell-bottoms, surrounded by political posters shouting, "Sisterhood is powerful" and "ERA now," encouraging us to play with non-sexist toys.
It was not just thrilling to be around the bustle and brainstorming happening at Ms. It was like walking into a bullpen of loving, cheerleading surrogate mothers, egging us on to reach for every goal, to demand, expect, and play our part in creating a society that opens any opportunity for every young woman. But a highlight was Mom and Gloria's friendship and collaboration. They swapped ideas and advice, debated lovingly, laughed in the face of naysayers, and as today demonstrates, showed up for each other to constantly support each other's projects and priorities.
Letty is a celebrated writer, activist, and speaker, the author of 12 books, including Deborah, Gold and Me, and Getting Over, Getting Older. She was editorial consultant on Free to Be You and Me, and she makes the crispiest potato latke on the Upper West Side.
Gloria is an iconic writer, activist, and speaker, the author of 11 books, including My Life on the Road and Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. And I grew up privileged to witness her impressive tap dancing talents at our family's annual Hanukkah party.
We know that Mom is so thrilled to have her soulmate and collaborator and cheerleader, Gloria, as her interlocutor tonight to talk about Mom's beautiful, honest new book, which every one of you better buy. It's on Amazon. Can you say that anymore? Just buy it at your local bookstore. Buy it here. It's called Shanda, a Memoir of Shame and Secrecy.
So without further ado, please welcome two pioneers who inspired generations and who happen to be two of the most important women in our lives, Gloria Steinem and Letty Cottin Pogrebin.
I forgot to mention, When it's time to questions from the audience, if you have a question, you'll need to raise your hand. A staff member will walk around with a microphone, and you can ask your question. Thank you and enjoy, ladies and gentlemen.
Letty,
Immediately, I have to
I wanna
change
say-
the furniture here.
While you're changing the furniture, I want to say thank you for having daughters. I didn't do that. They were fan-fucking-tastic.
You famously said to me, "What a nice thing that you gave birth to your best friends."
Well, it's clear that we've known each other for a long time, even though we're separated by flowers now. Okay. So maybe we should account for how. Do you want to begin the history?
Yes, but I'm never sure if you remember this. But this
Probably not.
This is how I remember us meeting. I had published a book called How to Make It in a Man's World, and as a result, I was given, these things don't usually happen, but I was given a column in the Ladies' Home Journal called The Working Woman, which was the first, all women are working women, but the first column in a mainstream women's magazine that recognized that women work outside the home and women contribute to the household and sometimes actually allow the household to function. And as a result of that column, I got a phone call from Betty Friedan, who said, a group of us are starting the National Women's Political Caucus, and I'd like you to come down and be my writer. I didn't know what that meant, to be her writer, but it sort of sounded interesting, and I was a baby feminist, and she was a famous feminist. So I said yes, and I went down there, and it's not a secret that Betty Friedan was a difficult woman, and being her writer was certainly not an easy task. Write this, write that, write this. And at one point, this part you didn't know at all, she said to me, why don't you go off and write up the plenary session, because I'm going to need a statement of purpose about the plenary session, what we decided. And so I creep away. This is 1971, July, and I creep away and I say, where am I going to do this? I had, only pads with me. There was no computers. And I opened the door to a little workshop room, such as they had in the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, D.C., which is where we convened the National Women's Political Caucus. And who's in there but you, all by yourself, also with like a legal pad and pencils and stuff. And I said, hi, it's Gloria. Then I introduced myself, and I said, I'm really sorry. I just needed a place because Betty asked me to write up the statement of purpose. She said, well, I'm writing up the statement of purpose too. Why don't we do it together? And this was you in a nutshell. I'm nobody at all, and you're saying to me, why don't we do it together? And you're one of my, all-time heroes at that point, as a writer who had made it in New York. And we started working on it together because I had my notes and you had your notes. And at some point, it was so freezing because hotel rooms are famously over air conditioned themselves. And so you said, why don't we just take the felt tablecloths off the tables? And we wrapped ourselves in the felt tablecloths and we wrote together until 3 a.m. And then you said, you know what, you might like to be part of a group that's been meeting a little bit, and we're really going to buckle down now, and we're going to start a magazine. And I said, count me in, and that was how it happened. How do you remember it?
I'm so glad you're into detail, because I only remember, I forgot about the tablecloth. I remember about Betty. Anyway, I had been a writer for Esquire and New York Magazine, helped to start New York Magazine, which was just then beginning. And I had, of course, given myself a column in New York Magazine. Right? And I went to cover a early women's liberation meeting in a church basement downtown, just to cover it, of course. I wasn't thinking of myself as an activist. And they were, one by one, standing up and talking about what it was like to need and to seek an abortion that was then illegal. And the stories were, as you can imagine, as the stories are still, right? And I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I have been through this. I also have had an illegal abortion. Why is it secret? Why, if then 1 in 3 American women had needed this at some time in their lives, why was it secret and dangerous? And that was the beginning. You know, it's like taking one strand out of a knot and, you know, it just goes and goes and goes. That was the beginning. I began to write about that. The other people, therefore, got in touch with me. Florence Kennedy, who remembers here Florence Kennedy, the great, okay. Dorothy Pittman Hughes, lots and lots of other people. And because we couldn't say everything, of course, that we wanted to in print, which just wasn't possible, we started to and we were being invited to come to speak in church basements, and, you know, we found ourselves, I mean, first of all, I had become a writer so I didn't have to talk. I mean, that was the whole idea. Right?
You were shy. You were shy.
Yeah, no, well, literally, I just didn't want to, I lost all my saliva, each tooth got a little Angora sweater. Does that happen to you? But there was kind of no way out of it, and but I couldn't do it by myself, so I first did it with Dorothy Pittman Hughes, then she had a baby and wanted to stay home more, then Flo Kennedy, and so that was the beginning for me, and the understanding that there needed to be a magazine. I mean,
But you don't remember the room with the tablecloths?
No.
No. I mean, I just wanted to bring you back to your own question of when we met, because I was not in that church
No,
basement.
I remember the caucus. I just don't remember this. It's going to all be like this. You know?
But it reminds me of when we ran a page in the magazine saying we have had abortions. This was when abortion was still illegal in this country, although it had been legalized in New York. And we signed it, and we ran it in the magazine. And now I see in the current issue of Ms., they have gathered page after page after page of signatures, and it was just wonderful. The whole back end of Ms. is full of signatures of people who have now signed "We've had abortions," because talk about shame and secrecy. I know you have already written about the fact that you had an abortion in London. You had to leave the country. I write in this book about having had 2 abortions in my senior year in college. Now, I wrote in the New York Times many years ago about having an abortion. I could not admit at that point to having 2. Isn't that a little bizarre? If I'm admitting in 1994 or 5, whenever that appeared in the Times.
That was incredibly brave of you. I mean, you know, you can explain to us why you only admitted to 1.
You're right.
I
I will explain about it because it's about being Jewish. I'm bringing a little bit of Jewish relevance here because we are in Temple Emanu-El and the Streicker Center. Thank you to the Streicker family for sponsoring us. They do great stuff. But the Jewish part and the Shanda, as most people in this room know, Shanda means in Yiddish shame or disgrace or scandal or humiliation. It's the worst thing that can happen to you, except for the C word, which is how I was raised. That's cancer, which was also completely unmentionable. But and illness was a Shanda. Illness was something to hide. But I hid the fact that I had 2 abortions because I would have been looked at as stupid. How could I have 1 abortion and not learn how to protect myself? Well, the answer is I was in my senior year. I was 18 years old. My mother had died when I was 15, and, you know, no one sent me the memo. I really never quite figured out how babies are made. I I happened to have an active sex life and no understanding of physiology at that point. And so I couldn't admit to two because one was a way of saying, okay, every woman should admit that she's had an abortion because so many of us have, and don't allow people to stigmatize you for it. It's part of responsible reproductive health care. Even back then, I really was very comfortable admitting it. But I couldn't admit that I was so dumb that I hadn't figured out birth control, so that I had 2 abortions within 4 months. And that seemed to me a Shanda. It was shameful to admit that.
But it's not dumb. It's a lack of simple health education that we are all entitled to and should have now.
Yes.
I remember sitting in the middle of the Kalahari Desert with a group of women who had never left the desert and were living as they had lived for I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of years. And they showed me the plants that they used to increase fertility, the plants they used for abortifacients. I mean, this was just part of life.
Yeah.
So the real question is, how did it get to be not just part of life? And the answers, of course, lie in patriarchy and in racism and in, all the forces that
The loss of women's wisdom, the loss of women's wisdom, which our foremothers, they had the wherewithal, they had the understanding, they were in tune with nature, and they knew what to do.
And so they were called witches.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Hello,
Right. There's a meme running around the internet right now that says, "Why were we taught to fear witches instead of the people who burned them?"
Right.
Right.
No, it is. I mean, the divisions that come with patriarchy, with racism, with anti-Semitism, with, whatever the crazy group bias is, are the ones we are still dealing with. And we are still dealing with them in our presidential elections. We're still dealing with them in our, who's who in corporations and who's the university president and who isn't and so on. But consciousness is the first step, and that is why it's so important that we're all here plotting together. This is a coven right here. So your writing is crucial to this consciousness.
Well, I really hope, there's only one chapter on my 2 abortions, but I do hope that it helps to destigmatize, because women are still not owning up to it. They're still a little embarrassed. They're still a little ashamed, as if, if I asked you in this room, I won't embarrass anybody because people still are embarrassed. But if I asked you to raise your hand if you either had an abortion or know somebody close to you who had an abortion, let me put it that way, let's see, how many? Yeah, look at that. And yet we're not speaking openly, or we haven't until now, because we realize that it's life or death. But we should move on to another topic, because I think we've already organized
would you
them
like to...
enough here.
Well, one of the things that Letty was asking me here is about my family background, because my mother and both my grandmothers were theosophists, even though, my paternal grandmother was Jewish, my maternal grandmother was Christian, but somehow this theosophy movement, which some of you have at least read about, I bet, that was very, very popular. It still exists.
Is that Gurdjieff? Gurdjieff, is he the philosopher? Anyway, it's exotic to me.
But there's still theosophical centers in most cities and theosophical reading rooms and so on. And it was just the revolutionary idea that God is in every person, and that God knowledge was therefore implicit in every person, and each child who arrives is a miracle, unto himself or herself.
But you had a Jewish grandmother. You segued over that, but we're in Temple Emanu-El, so I'm going to stop and focus. You had a Jewish grandmother named Pauline
Perlmutter Steinem.
Okay, there are a lot of Perlmutters in New York, maybe a relative. But your grandmother was a secure member of the Jewish community, because I looked her up. She's somebody who was affiliated, and she may not have been a believer in Judaism as we think of it now, but she acted out her Judaism. And eventually she saved Holocaust survivors. However, her brother died in Theresienstadt, I think.
Yes, she had come either from Russia or just outside Russia, the part that changed back and forth, and was living in Vienna when my grandfather went to find a bride and brought her back to Toledo. She, unfortunately, I was awfully little when she died, but I'm very proud to be related to her. And she was very important in Toledo. She founded the first vocational high school, for instance, and led Women to Vote.
She was one of the first women to win an office in Toledo, and wasn't it city government?
She was on the school board. She was elected to the school board, and she led Women to Vote, even though gangs of men and boys harassed them away from the polling places. But, in my case, and maybe I share this with some of you, it's amazing how your family can conceal the rebellious members that came before,
Oh.
So all I really learned about her, and she died when I was about 5, was that she kept a kosher table.
Really?
Right. It took scholars in Toledo to introduce me to my own grandmother.
And then Henry Louis Gates did also. And Henry Louis Gates in his television show.
Yeah, well, that came a lot later. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But I can one-up you because, as I read about in Shanda, I had a grandmother. Also, the rebelliousness was buried, was hidden, was never discussed until long after she died. She was a runaway bride. My grandmother was betrothed to a guy. Think about Fiddler on the Roof, and that's my grandmother's story. She was a betrothed to a guy who was much older than she. Think about Laser Wolf the Busher, right? And she jumped out of the bridal chamber before the marriage was consummated. So I've been assured by scholars, Jewish scholars, that we are not mamzerim, meaning we are not all children of a bigamist. But she did jump out the window by putting together a bunch of bed sheets and creating, a sort of thing to shinny down. And she ran away and married my grandfather in Poland. Now, I write, I think, very, movingly about this part because I never knew my grandmother as a person. She was a little old Jewish woman who was always in the kitchen. She always smelled from onions. She always had an apron on. She always had her hair in a little bun. And she wasn't a person to me. She was somebody whose teeth were in a glass at night, in a glass of water. She's somebody who, with my grandfather, they took Wonder Bread and mashed it up with hot milk. This was not a role model for me. But imagine if I had known that under her little crocheted shawl was a Wonder Woman cape of somebody who took her life in her own hands and just, made it different. She took control of her life in 1898 or 99 and married the man she wanted. Now, unfortunately, the denouement is not happy because if you now remember Hester Street, a movie about the Lower East Side, my grandmother, when she was brought over by my grandfather, who had a promise to take, to first land here and set up livable situation on the Lower East Side, and he opened a coffee and tea shop, and he finally did send for her under duress. He didn't want to. Turns out he was having an affair here, like in Hester Street. And like Carol Kane came over, if you remember, and was an old world person whose husband had reacclimated himself and assimilated. Same thing happened to my grandmother and my grandfather. The first thing off the boat, he asked her for a divorce. So that's the sad denouement, but I prefer to remember her as a rebel, you know. And if only we had known, the girls in my family might have been a little less polite about our lives. We were raised as good girls, nice Jewish girls.
Well, you know, that's the lesson here, maybe. I don't know how many of us know our families or have secrets in our families or have asked the older members of our families. I don't know, but it's a great project.
Yes.
And it's an honorable project, and it is the way history should be told from the bottom up, you know?
Well, I try to tell our kids that we wanted our children, for example, to know that the life we lead now is not the life that existed for our family just 2 generations ago. 1 generation before me, 2 generations before them. So we took over the Tenement Museum on the Lower East Side for our 35th wedding anniversary. And we asked everybody in the family to bring some artifact that would remind us of the modest beginnings of our family. And then we toured the Tenement Museum with Ruth Abram, who was its founder. And we showed the children, there were no grandchildren yet, but we showed the children that my mother and her sister slept head to toe in a cot the size of an army cot. And they slept near an air shaft because there was no interior windows. And they shared one bathroom with everyone else on the floor. There was something like 30 people for one bathroom. And we wanted them to see our history because otherwise we look like, you know, to the middle class born, which we were not. And another story that I would never have otherwise known had I not confronted the concealment of a secret of one aunt. This aunt married my Uncle Herbie right after the war. And immediately in my family, which is a pro-natalist family, and it was post-Holocaust, when Jewish women had to have children. You had to replenish our people. The 6 million, more than 1 million of whom were children. And that was our duty. So my Aunt Joan comes into the family, and immediately the family is saying, so, when are you going to get pregnant? Where's the belly? So, what's taking so long? And finally, my Aunt Joan says to the family that I was one of 24 cousins, and my mother's and father's generation were 7 on each side. So it was a very large family. And after the Seder, one year, we're sitting eating chocolate-covered matzah. And mind you, everyone in the family had been tiptoeing around Aunt Joan because she had told us all that she was barren. And everybody felt sorry for her in the family. Nobody would talk about children. Nobody would allow their children to play near her. God forbid she would feel guilty that she was barren and couldn't add to the Jewish people. So she and I are sitting on the couch at my sister's house after the Seder, nibbling on our chocolate-covered matzah, and she's asking me, this is 1968, when my son David had just been born. He's the absent one. He's the Elijah of this evening. He's not here, but he exists. And my son David had just been born in 1968, and she starts saying, it must be so hard for your little twins to deal with a new baby in the family when they've been fussed over for 3 years, you know? And I'm saying, isn't this delicious chocolate? Isn't it amazing how Barton's is now making really good chocolate-covered matzah? anything to get her mind off talking about my new baby. And then she takes me by the shoulder. She grips my shoulder and she says, "Letty, you don't have to protect me. I'm not barren. I've had 2 abortions." And I said, "You've what? You mean we've been feeling sorry for you all these years?" She said, "I could not admit that I didn't want children. How would it have been taken in your family? The aunts had never let up on me. The only way to stop them was to say I was barren." So these kind of charades that families go through to cover up stuff, and that women in particular, the secrets that women keep in order to protect their reputation. Immigrant families are still doing what our family did, which was to try to present a good face to the world, to try to be, in their case, real Americans. They didn't want anybody to speak badly of them. They wanted to be as perfect as they could be. And I think that meant losing their accent. That meant not talking about the poverty. It's not a pattern that it's unfamiliar to us, you know.
No, and probably each of us has some version of that. So it'd be interesting to take as an assignment just interviewing our families,
Oh, great idea.
pursuing what you've always wondered about, you know, just having a conversation that has not been had, whatever it is.
But you need some place to start, Gloria. You know, you need some kind of an opening, unless you use your journalistic, you know, entitlement to start. But people are afraid to open wounds. And I think, you know, it's something that you need to do with sensitivity. Every time I speak anywhere about the secrets in my family, people come up to me and offer me, like a gift, the secrets in their families. They normalize mine because I'm out there on the page. I mean, for example, I'll just say one story about my poor mother, who was so embarrassed to have been raised in poverty, embarrassed to have had an accent, embarrassed to have had an 8th grade education. My mother went so far as to go to a photo studio and take out of the prop box a diploma, make herself look older, and pose herself so she could say, "This is my high school graduation picture," when she had graduated from the 8th grade because she had to leave to work in a garment factory to support her family. My mother took a subway up to her uncle's house in the Upper Bronx, which was considered a nice neighborhood. I don't know what it's like now, but it wasn't the Lower East Side, and it wasn't 9 people living in 3 rooms. And my mother took the subway up there and told her dates to pick her up there, so they would never see where she lived and in what circumstances. And then she would get, when the date would go, she would get back in the subway and go all the way back to the Lower East Side. She wanted to pretend. I know, it makes me just well up, the shame. My parents got divorced in 1927. Each of them had a daughter by their first marriage. I didn't know this. I didn't know it until I was 12. My parents constructed a complete fiction that they were married in 1923 to each other. They weren't. They had each been divorced, and then they married each other in 1937. I was born in 1939. I did not know until I was 12 years old that not only had they been married before, but my sister was my mother. You knew Betty. Betty was a librarian at Ms. Magazine, 14 years older than I. I didn't have any idea that she was my half-sister, not my whole sister, and I didn't know until my father drew me a diagram in the sand in Winthrop, Massachusetts, to finally fess up that he had a daughter who he had abandoned when he married my mother. Secret upon secret upon secret. So the thing that again makes your heart hurt is that I came upon a photograph in which my mother had taken it to a photo studio, which is like Photoshop is today, and cut out her first husband and had them paste in a picture of my father so that she could pretend to the world that he had been her husband all along. This is in a photograph it was taken years before my father was ever in my mother's life. She had him pasted in so she wouldn't, because divorce was a Shanda from above all Shandas. You mean to have been divorced was to be a failure? And she was divorced because she was an abused wife? How could that be? Jewish men don't abuse. We all grew up with Jewish men don't abuse. Jews aren't alcoholics. You know, all the things Jews supposedly weren't, and we've discovered we are.
Yeah, my mother was not in the right culture exactly to experience shame and Shanda in the same way. But it's true that she was married twice to my father, once secretly because the Jewish and Christian intermarriage was not necessarily popular with either one. So they got married secretly, and then they got married publicly. So he would write to his first wife, and so on. That's why you thought that.
I did. I thought I wrote to Gloria just a couple of weeks ago. I said, I just looked up your family as best I could, and I found your father was married before. And she said, no, that was a secret marriage.
Yeah, no, that was my mother. No, my version of the problems of the era were more disappointed dreams, because my mother was a journalist. She loved being a journalist. And after she'd been married to my father and had my older sister, she just couldn't keep up both lives. And she gave up the thing she loved the most, which was her journalism. And, you know, that is, and I'm sure many men did this too in order to support their families and gave up their dreams. So, you know, at least acknowledging them now, if I think either one of us can urge, not that it's up to us, but, you know, can urge, advise anything, it's to complete our family stories, ask questions, write them down, you know, because we are made to feel that education is out there, and it is, but it's also in here.
Well, I have 52 chapters, each of them a different Shanda in my life. I mean, that's how Meshuggah my family is. Really, I cannot tell you how shocked I was. My daughter Abigail's daughter, Molly, was taking a biography course in college, and she came to me one day and she said, our professor has assigned us a biography of a living person, and I decided I want to write about you, Grandma. And I said, oh, wow, how great, wonderful. She said, well, wait a minute, because I'm not going to write about you unless you guarantee me you won't touch my copy. Now, as an editor, you know, itchy-fingered. But she said, I want to be free to ask you anything, and whatever I come up with, I don't want you to censor. So I promised. And she then, being a very dutiful scholar, she went up to Smith College. We both have our archives at Smith. And she spent 3 days there, I believe. And then she read all my books, and then she read through all my articles. And then she came to my house one day, and she said, my apartment, she said, I want to go through all your files here, and I have a wall of file cabinets. And she looks at them and she says, okay, I see where everything is, but where is the childhood stuff? And I said, oh, I haven't looked at that stuff in years. It's under there. And I opened up a cabinet that's a very deep cabinet in my study. And immediately she plucks out my teenage diaries. I don't know about you, but I kept teenage diaries that had a little lock and key on them, as if somebody was going to, violate my privacy in a terrible way. And Molly takes those out. She starts reading them. She said, "These are good. These I need. What else is under there?" And I look way down, and I pull out an old plastic shopping bag that my sister Betty, this one who was 14 years older than myself, had given to me when she died. And that was 8 or 9 years before, and I had never looked at it because immediately after she gave it to me, my sister died, and I wasn't in a mood to cry any more than I was already crying. I didn't want to look at old letters. And I had just shoved it into this cabinet. And with Molly's encouragement, I pulled it out, upended it on my dining room table, and there were hundreds of letters. Let me say, this generation of historians and memoirists is not going to have that epiphanic moment because they're going to get everything on email, and it's all in abbreviation form. LMK, did all of you know that means let me know? I did not. But that sort of thing doesn't lend itself to memoir writing. And here I had hundreds and hundreds of letters that I went through of my parents arguing with each other when my father was in Palestine, settling the details of his father's estate. He left my mother when she was 7 months pregnant with me. This was consistent with my father's general behavior, as I remember him. But those letters also showed me that everybody had a secret. My sister had letters in there full of her secrets, and that's when I also discovered that not only had my sister had 2 abortions, my mother had had abortions, and my grandmother, who was married in 1898 and had 7 children, had abortions. I mean, the exposure of people's deepest concerns and fears and shame was in these letters and in these documents.
All right, but to fast forward for a minute, you and Bert are about to celebrate your 59th wedding anniversary. It's here. And in the book, you write about having had a secret-free marriage.
Secret-free marriage, right?
Secret-free, right. So, do we want to know the secret of a secret-free marriage?
It's really simple, and the payoff is so great if you can do it. Just to give you an example of how it works is we have always opened each other's mail. I mean, it's so natural to us. We open each other's mail. We know each other's calendar. There's just nothing off limits in our relationship. And as a result, I have never had to worry about him. He never has to worry about me. We know each other inside out. I don't know what it would have been like, because I traveled a lot throughout the last 50 years for my books, for Ms., promoting things. And he was out late because he's a labor lawyer, and he was negotiating and stopping strikes and all of that sort of thing. And what would we have done if we were suspicious? What would we have done if we didn't feel confident and trusting? And as I look back while I was writing this, I realized that it was because my parents lied that I needed a husband who wouldn't. And luckily, I got one.
All right, well, because we fondly believe that this book should be a movie, right? Okay. If someone were casting the movie version of your memoir, who would you want to play you? Who would you want to play Bert, your mom, your dad, your sister Betty?
Okay.
Just little questions like that.
Well, I have fantasized about that, in case there are any people who are interested in an option. I would like to have been played by Barbra Streisand, because she meant a lot to me, because her beauty was not conventional. and she was a Jewish woman who became a star, and that was a first. Otherwise, you had to be June Allison and Lana Turner. Barbara Streisand looked like my family and me. I mean, you know, I have a little bit of a long nose, not a bump one, but a long one. So I'd want Barbara Streisand to play the younger me. And it's tough for who I would like to be Bert, but I decided it would be Jean-Paul Belmondo. And I felt that I would like Meryl Streep to be my mother, because she looked a lot like my mother, who died when I was 15, and I have a picture of her in my head at age 55. She's frozen in time for me. And I would have liked my father to be Clark Gable, because my father looked like Clark Gable. And now we should go to questions from the audience. But thank you for that question. Dream on, Letty, right? Okay, any questions from the audience?
Or answers. We could use answers.
Yeah. I always say Judaism likes questions much more
There's
than
at
answers.
least one mic here, maybe more.
Well, I do want to do a nod to appreciate this evening, Letty, and your contributions along with Gloria's. And someday we have to talk about all that labor law and where that's headed and what we're going to do about unions and Starbucks and all that. But
Have my husband's in the first row.
for a minute, okay, I'll reserve a moment with him, with Bert. I do want to just ask Gloria a question. I brought my daughter, who you met earlier, when she was about 4 or 5, to a march in D.C., and you proclaimed from the podium at that time, we were way in the back, and said, I'm passing the baton. It's time for the young women to take the baton and take this further. Have they done that, and what should they be doing?
Well, first of all, it's their baton, and they should not be doing what I think they should be doing. They should be doing whatever the fuck they think it should.
Okay.
And yes, I think they have. You know, I mean, not everybody, but I would say the majority are much more able to use their talents, live their own lives, not feel they have to be married at a certain point or married at all, be clear about the fact that they're in love with another woman, or you know, that they're leading a life without the price of rebellion that we paid in our generation. Maybe I'm, you know, you have to correct for the fact that I'm a hopeaholic, okay? So, but I do think that the, say, under 30, 35 generation of women inspires me, absolutely, completely. It's just so profoundly different from especially my, even older than Letty, growing up in the 50s, which the 50s were the pits.
She's 5 years older, and she always pulls seniority on me.
No, I feel, I do in general feel really good about young women who can be themselves without the price necessarily of rebellion.
Hi. Along with the same lines, what I feel like with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we're going so backwards. And, you know, I just want to know, since you were part of the movement that got it passed, and how do you suggest, or what is your best advice for people in general to try to get back to where we were? I feel like we've gone backwards.
Well, obviously the Supreme Court, everything, that's all serious. But the fact is that where most women live, abortion remains safe and legal. I mean, New York, California, you count the other states, it's still profoundly, profoundly different from what it was when we began. And also, at the same time, I think we're not admitting, at least nationally and in a media kind of way, admitting the racist reasons for the resistance to reproductive freedom as a fundamental human right. The first generation of babies in this country, who are majority babies of color, has already been born. Clearly, this country is not going to be a majority white country in the future. This is very troublesome to a group of people who are against reproductive freedom, against abortion. I'm not saying this is true of everybody, but some of it is racial, and we need to talk about that because we are going to be a majority people of color country, which to me means we're going to have better relationships with the rest of the world, we're going to have better food, but
Music.
but there is about a third of the sort of Trump-like third of the country that is resistant to this, and I wish we could talk about it. It would help if we talked about it.
I also would like to say that we have to be very pragmatic and very hard-headed about it, and that means do a state-by-state strategy until such time as passing a federal legalization law is possible, which I don't believe it is now or going to be very soon. But we can stop the state-by-state erosion, and we can make sure that secretaries of state are not, I won't say Trumpers, but are not ultra-right-wing extremists. And look at the state legislatures and see how they are, and how important they are. Every single level of government is important. School boards, because they're banning books. City councils, local county offices. All of that, it turns out, the right wing was very correct about, that you have to go bottom up. But my answer to right now is Lysistrata. Do you remember the play Lysistrata? Withhold sex from men, and then you won't get pregnant. That's the answer. I mean, withhold sex. Punish men by withholding sex.
But what about men who are voting the right way? Do we want to?
Yeah, we don't want to. Well, we can be very precise in making that policy.
Back left.
Where's the mic?
Hi,
Hi.
all the way in the back. Thanks so much. I generally find that I have an easy time identifying progress, and I'm happy when our world is, demonstrating a live and let live sort of mentality, and people get to make whatever decisions they want to make as long as they're not hurting anyone else. And so my instincts usually guide me along those guidelines in a pretty comfortable and seamless way. I'm getting a little bit stuck, and I've sort of lost my gut when it comes to the issue of trans people in athletics. And I'm very curious what both of you think about that, because it's so obvious to me that I want trans people to do whatever the hell they want to do in the world and identify however they want to identify. And I also don't know what it means for female identifying people from an earlier time in their lives or from birth who have worked to succeed in a particular category and are now feeling frustration about that. I don't really know where my gut lands on that one, and I'm very curious where each of yours lands.
I'll answer the athletic question, and you answer the general question, if you would. Okay. For me, the question of trans competitors in sports is an easy one to solve. It's already been solved in some instances, but I'll give you an analog that works, and that is, we have categories for lightweight, middleweight, heavyweight boxers. Okay, we have a standard. You don't get into one category because you feel like it. You're in it because you get on a scale or you get muscle mass or whatever it is, and that gets you into the category. So I think to make a gender-blind set of standards, you weigh this much, in this particular kind of competition, or you have this much muscle mass, and whatever you are, whatever gender you are, you can compete. That seems to me very doable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no perfect solution probably, but I think the height-weight one is the most logical. In tennis, in all kinds of sports, that's what matters, and in a way that's where we started with the first controversy over what was his name? I can't remember. Anyway,
Renee
tennis
Richards?
player, Renee Richards. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, nothing's perfect, but I think sports divided by or grouped by, you might say, height and weight rather than by gender or
Gender
race or
identity.
anything else.
Mhm.
Hi, we're back here in the balcony.
In your memoir, you talk about balancing like your activism and your job with being a mother, and like you're prioritizing your family. And I know that you say that your daughters also like said that they didn't necessarily agree with how you balance that, and like that's obviously a hard discussion to have. How do you think you balance that? And also, is it even possible to balance your activism and your family in the right way?
Thank you for that question. I have a chapter in Shanda about feeling a degree of shame about not talking about this, not about what I did. I did the best I could in terms of balancing work, family. I mean, I was a writer. I went to Ms. Magazine 3 days a week. I was a writer at the same time, and I had 3 children. I did the best I could, but when my daughters, more than my son, but when my daughters were like in their 30s, they hit me with, we would have liked more of you. And that was a killer for me. I mean, I'm on the page with it.
Did they say it to Bert?
They had a lot of Bert when I was not around. So he got points for just, being a man who was a parent. He was not one of those I'll babysit the children kind of husbands. We really did share. But when I would go away like for 6 weeks to a writer's colony, and I thought I was doing him a mitzvah because he was now alone with our children and getting to know them in a way very many men never do. He knew their shoe sizes. He knew the names of all their friends. He planned their play dates. The buck stopped with him, and I thought, isn't this great? We're modeling a balanced, 2-parent household. And in their 30s, they tell me, Mom, they hit me with it very gently. We would have liked more of you. And I blame myself for being kind of numb to that. I didn't realize that what they really wanted was to be able to tell me straight out, we want more of you, Mom. And I would have found ways to solve it in the moment for each individual situation. But you know how sad it is when you can't fix something that you regret. My kids were they were in their 30s. What was I going to do? Relive 10 years old? No. And they are constantly reassuring me because they're very sensitive and very loving children. This doesn't mean we didn't want you to do that. That doesn't mean we didn't love that you were marching and that you took us marching and that you had your consciousness raising groups in the house and that we were at Ms. We loved all of that, but we would have liked more of you. And I should have been sensitive to it and just let them air it. They grew up in a household where they thought it would not be safe to say that. And that's the only downside of being a feminist parent, that I don't think I made it safe for them to talk about the contradictions.
Well, I would just say, in your defense and your daughter's defense,
Here comes the wonderful Gloria friend.
I mean, my mother could not do the work she loved. She was a journalist. She wanted to be a writer. This was impossible, taken away from her. She became depressed. She became somebody who, lived on the original version of tranquilizers, which
Right.
was sodium chloride, I think, something.
Right.
I mean, so it's not an individual fault in either case. The point is that we are just doing our best and passing the baton on to the next generation and trying to support them. There is no single answer. Right?
Thank you, Gloria, darling. Trying to make me feel better. Thank you.
Before we take the last question for the night, I wanted to thank Letty again for being with us tonight and sharing her story, to Gloria Steinem for being back with us. Thank you. For those of you who still want to purchase the book, they're available outside. Last question, make it a good one.
Pressure.
Oh.
Thank you. And I want first to say I want some instruction on how to join your club, because I, Gloria, am much more conflicted. I listen to how we can make sports equal, but the physicality is not the whole question. We have hormonal differences and other differences, including abortions and pregnancies, and how that upends us and takes our time and energy. What I'd like, and let me mention internationally, what's happening is very disturbing and very old. So, got the question. I've been told. What advice can you give to us as to how to go forward when we're aware of what's happening on an international level and when the realities of our bodies hit us? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that huge question. I think we need to place the power in ourselves and empower other people to answer those questions in an individual, true, clear way, and to support each other in doing it. I agree we don't have a voice back enough to the web and the internet and whatever the public is, but we have this room. We have all kinds of subversive people here. We can meet each other or meet online or Zoom. We are communal animals. We need each other. That's the most important thing. The most sinister, difficult, negative thing is being alone, feeling alone. So whatever it is we are experiencing, and this place of worship is, a place of connection, find 2 or 3 or 4 people who are asking the same questions, feel the same way, and suddenly you have a revolutionary cell.
That's right. On that note, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you and good night, everyone.